Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Steve Keller. I am the curriculum developer of online platforms and programs for the YMCA's Youth Cannabis Awareness Program. Now, joining me this afternoon, we have Emma Schmitz from Alberta. Do you want to say hello there, Emma?
Hi, everyone.
And additionally, we have a placement student with us today, Jonathan Mikhailov. Do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself, Jonathan?
Yes, hi there, everyone. Thanks, Steve. I will be running the chat panel and as well as the Q&A section if anyone has any questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. So, welcome to today's presentation. The topic at hand is cannabis in media and its impact on youth. We've seen depictions of substances in media, particularly cannabis, change significantly over the last 10 to 20 years. And what we're going to be talking about today are the conventions and knowledge bases that we need to understand when it comes to media literacy and awareness of understanding what we see in media, what to question about media, and not just for ourselves. But I realize that many of you on the call today, many of you that are listening, and many of you that will be watching this recording, work with youth yourselves. So understanding these conventions are helpful when it comes to having discussions with young people, young adults, teens, even children, about substance use and awareness of things like perception and bias, the differences between public service versus advertising, and some of the conventions that companies can use to show cannabis to underage Canadians or to minors, even though there are laws and regulations put in place in attempts to prevent this from happening in any promotional manner. Now, before we get started, I would like to acknowledge where I am presenting from today, which is in Peterborough, Ontario, Canada, upon territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, adjacent to the Haudenosaunee territory. I've been very fortunate to actually grow up in this area. I grew up in the city of Belleville as a child, right next to Tyendinaga First Nation. So I was fortunate enough to spend a great deal of time in the area as a youth. Growing up over these last 8 years, I've been working in the Youth Gambling Awareness Program for the YMCA and now the Youth Cannabis Awareness Program. In both cases, being able to spend a great deal of time working with many of the Indigenous communities in my region in particular, whether that be Curve Lake, whether that be Hiawatha, whether that be Alderville, and being able to connect with their substance use support workers, their mental health workers, and their child and youth workers to learn a great deal about the importance of respecting culture and cultural practices when it comes to supporting youth from any diverse communities. Emma, do you want to take a moment to acknowledge where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I'm currently located in St. Albert, Alberta, which is in Treaty 6 territory. I just want to acknowledge that Treaty 6 territory is the traditional lands of the Métis, the Cree, Nakota Sioux, Dene Sulini, Saulteaux, and many other Indigenous peoples who are the caretakers of this land and a vital part of our society.
Wonderful, thank you. Without further ado, I think we'll get right into it. Many of you have likely seen the workshops that we have done over the last 3 years, but we do like to start off every presentation with a quick explanation of who our program is and what it is that we do. And when we do this, we like to discuss sort of 3 pillars of our program. The first is that we are neutral on the topic of cannabis. We are not here to endorse nor condone those individuals who may choose to use or not use cannabis. We like to create a judgment-free space and promote what we know as a balanced perspective, illustrating both the uses, highlighting the potential applications of cannabis, but also pointing out the potential risks, harms, and strategies to lower the chances of experiencing harm as a result of substance use. Now, finally, the third thing that we discuss in all of our presentations is harm reduction, with an understanding that abstinence is certainly an option, and we know that many Canadians will choose not to use cannabis. Approximately 20% of Canadians over the age of 15 do report using cannabis in the last 12 months, according to multiple survey data. So we do understand that promoting abstinence only would unfortunately neglect or potentially stigmatize those who would choose to use. And harm reduction is that understanding that people may choose to use substances, but if so, we like to prepare them with any skills or strategies to lower or mitigate some of the potential harms that could rise in relation to substance use. But today we know the focal point of the presentation is a little bit different than some of the others that we've done. Many of the other workshops we do focus heavily on the science and the health discussions around substance use. But today we're really going to have to look at the media perception and media interpretation and display of cannabis. In order to do that, we need to define media. Now, if we were to look at media versus advertising, and I've asked this question to fourth-year psychology students in university. I've asked this question to 8-year-old kids. What's the difference between an ad and media? And what I'll often find is when someone tries to describe media, they often describe advertising. So I'm going to turn this to the audience. How would you describe media to someone? You can take a moment to enter your response in the chat panel. What is media? News sources, absolutely. What else do we see? Dispersion of information, I like that. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitter, social platforms. Absolutely, there's a wide array of them available to us. Channels used to share news and entertainment through various, oh, I love these definitions. We have a very knowledgeable audience. I always like when we get to do the national webinars for this exact reason. Many of you are speaking about the discussion of examples of media and giving us some really wonderful examples. Now, before I give you the definition that we have, I do like to define advertising because we are going to talk about it today. It's the paid messages whose intent is to inform or influence consumers to make decisions, usually around purchasing products or services. Now, there's a difference here between advertising and public service, which we'll get into a little later. But when we talk about media, what we're really talking about is a communication tool. When we have discussions with young people, I'll sometimes hear professionals talk about media as somehow morally good or morally evil. The truth is, media is not good or bad. It's a tool, and it's how it's used and how it's interpreted and how it's sort of promoted and practiced, how its uses are sort of drawn out by people that determines its worth. It's kind of like a hammer. I mean, you can buy a hammer and do a lot of good things with a hammer. You can build all kinds of materials, you can work with wood, but you can also hurt yourself pretty bad with a hammer. That doesn't make the hammer good. It doesn't make it bad. Either way, it's a tool. Media is another example of that. It's how it's used that determines any potential morality to it. And examples of media, many of you pointed out great ones. You talked about social media quite a bit, but there's also even further back media to think about, things like television, things like newspaper, you know, the printing press, if we want to go way, way back. Anything that allows communication to occur is an example of media. Emma?
All right. So throughout this presentation, we have a variety of different poll questions that are going to come up. So this is just the first one. So what percentage of teens have reported seeing cannabis advertisements in the past month? Is it 12%, 28%, 59%, or 87%? Feel free to answer in the chat.
I'm seeing
All
a lot
right,
of
so
votes for the high end, Emma, a lot of 59s and 87s.
yeah, I'm seeing that as well. I see 128, but lots, you know, kind of in that 59 to 87 range. All right, Steve, what's the answer? So it is actually about 59%. So more than half of teens have reported seeing cannabis advertisements in the past month. All right. So when we're talking about where youth have seen cannabis ads, what we find is that the majority of them are seeing them online. So that could be via social media. It could be kind of those different pesky ads that come up when you're trying to, for example, watch YouTube, scroll on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, etc., Snapchat. The second most common place where youth have seen cannabis ads are on the television. So maybe when they're watching TV, when maybe their parents have the news in the background, in magazines or newspapers. They're also seeing them though on the radio. They're seeing them on storefronts, but also on billboards.
Absolutely. So really having that interpretation of where youth are seeing these examples or these depictions of cannabis in media does become important when we're informing the discussion. But even as we're shaping that conversation, what we want youth to really consider is something that they learn quite early on in education. And it's funny, I point this out because, again, if I have a discussion with teens, with young adults, we bring up this question of critical thinking. I remember hearing a couple of years ago an interesting article about fake news and misleading information. It was saying that about four times the amount of people in their senior ages, so over age 65, will ascribe to fake news and false media versus teenagers and young adults. So we often try to teach kids about the importance of critical thinking, but this is a term that needs to be recalled at any particular age. So what do you think critical thinking means? And please don't just say thinking critically. How would you define that? Thinking critically. Knew someone was going to say it. Taking the time to evaluate information. I like that response. What is it you're evaluating? I see pros and cons. Objectively looking at information from all angles. I'm going to give you an example of one of the first times that young people understand and think about the idea of critical thinking, and they actually hear it called this. When kids are in about grade 4, grade 5 in many schools, they start doing things like book reports, right? Reviews. Maybe they're writing opinion pieces when they get a little older. And we ask them all these questions. It's like the news article questions, right? The who, the what, the where, the when, the how. I'm missing one, Emma. What I got, like who, what, when,
Where,
what's the other one?
why, how.
It's why. It's questioning what it is you're being shown. So someone mentioned the idea of objectively looking at information. And I see someone else mentioning thinking about where the information is coming from. But it's also taking that step further to ask, why is it that we're seeing this in this position? An example of this comes up when we talk about things like targeted advertising. Your phone will see this in many of the agreements that you make for apps and programs. You'll see this on computers. You'll see this on most social technology nowadays, is that you'll be asked if your location can be revealed, if information can be passed along to vendors to give a little bit more information about you, to optimize your viewing experience. Really what they're talking about here is targeted advertising. So when you see certain ads or you see certain bits of promotion, you're generally having that sculpted towards you based on what your sort of identification is as an audience. So for example, Emma and I both work in cannabis awareness. We spend a great deal of time reading and researching cannabis articles. Emma, how many times a week would you say that you see ads or promotions or discussion about cannabis in the ad pieces on your computer or on your phone?
To be 100% honest, I don't see cannabis ads very often. I'm not 100% sure why. I find that sometimes when, here in Alberta, we have different public health campaigns by Alberta Health Services. So I tend to see those more often, but I'm not really seeing different dispensaries advertising for ads. But an example I will give is last year I got a dog. And of course, when you get a puppy, you're researching everything to make sure that you can give it the best care possible. And everything that I talk about with my partner is about the dog. So I find that when I'm on social media, I see so many ads about dogs. But not only that, if I'm on TikTok, I see a lot of the videos that come up on my For You page are also dog related. And it all really just kind of comes back to that algorithm. But kind of getting back to cannabis, what about you, Steve? How often do you see cannabis ads?
Well, to your point, I most often see things that are discussing sort of awareness around cannabis. I'm seeing ads and pieces for things like CAMH. I'm seeing discussions and pieces for things like Drug Free Kids Canada. These pieces where we take a lot of research from. When I first started doing this program, I used to see a lot of ads for a retailer, I think it was called Tweed, cannabis retailer. And I would see these promotional ads come up, usually on YouTube and other social media pieces. But I knew it was because I was looking into things that were cannabis related. Prior to working in cannabis, I worked in gambling. I saw a great deal of advertisements for things like sports gambling and video gaming and upcoming sporting events to sort of try to promote gambling behaviors. When we think about critical thinking with advertising, one of the things we like to point out with youth is, why are they seeing the advertising they're seeing? Why are they seeing the messaging they're seeing when they're seeing it? And one thing that they need to consider is technology tries to gear advertisements and information towards a person's interest. And that understanding brings us to the idea of media literacy in and of itself. It's that ability to access and analyze information, to evaluate the data that we see coming into us, the things as simple as, what am I looking at in front of me right now, to something more complicated, like how do I glean through an entire list of reported data from a complex survey? And how do I communicate that information in a variety of different ways? And so there's this big, long definition here, but really what we're talking about is the ability to use critical thinking when interacting with media. And we practice this when we read, hear, and see anything online, in books, TV, on the radio, and even with speaking with others around us. In essence, what you're trying to do is read and view media critically. Now, why is that important? Well, it's easy to just say, well, we want to question things so that we're thinking. And we promote youth to do that, but we want to make sure that they're not just being able to answer that question, but they're being able to ask the right ones afterwards. And you'll see what we mean about that as we go along. We have a little game here, but before we get into it, I see a comment here in the chat panel. It says industry is also trying to target youth to get new customers. Youth vaping is dramatically increased. I did actually see this past year in the Canadian Cannabis Survey that vaping is now the second most commonly reported method of cannabis consumption for youth ages 16 to 19 after smoking dried leaf products. Every reporting data in previous years had smoking followed by edibles followed by vaping. So for the first time, we've finally seen vaping sort of surpass edibles when we're looking at behaviors and methods of consumption among young people. We're gonna play a game in this presentation. I always enjoy this game. It's an idea of discussing sort of pictures to words. What's gonna happen is over the next few slides, Emma and I are going to show you a few different images. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna write down or think about the very first word that comes to mind the second you see that picture. Now, when you see the picture, please do not write it in the chat panel right away. And I'll explain why afterwards. You can write it down on a piece of paper, you can think about it and kind of just keep it in mind. But please note that the word that you choose has to be different from the word on the slide. So Emma, if the picture in question was a picture of a cell phone and the word at the bottom said cell phone, what could be a word that you might think of when you see that picture other than cell phone?
Phone call.
Call, absolutely.
Call.
Yeah. What else?
Internet.
Internet, yeah. I might think about my wife, because my wife and I often communicate and whatnot over the phone. We work kind of different hours, right? Android, Apple. All right. So I'm going to show you the first picture. It's going to be about 5-10 seconds. I'm going to let you think about it, and then I'm going to ask you to put your responses into the chat. All right. Very first picture. What do you think of when you see this? Now you got about 5 or 10 seconds to think about it. Now, if you have a response, feel free to pop it into the chat panel. What do you think of?
See, someone wrote calories, chocolate, yum, summer.
I see delicious there. I see fun. I see sweet. What a wide array. Emma, what do you think of when you see ice cream?
Delicious.
Delicious. I like it. I like it. When we were actually focus testing and developing this particular deck, we actually showed this to some of our staff and we asked them this question, took the responses. We got things like chocolate, cold, truck, kids, sweet, melting, lactose, sundae, vanilla, brain-free, summer, delicious. And they were all different. You notice even if you look in the chat panel, we have several people in the call today. I think we've got somewhere around 35 or so, 30 to 35 people sitting and watching today. Now, for those of you that are watching, you'll notice you didn't all just give us the same answer. Some of you did, but some of you gave us completely different answers. Now keep that in mind. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you 3 more pictures. I'm not going to take up each picture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the first one, give you about 10 to 15 seconds to think about it. Then I'm going to jump to the second one, 10 to 15 seconds. Then jump to the third, 10 to 15 seconds. Then we'll review and we'll start talking about what we thought of for each word. Now, please keep in mind, you should not use the same word twice, and I doubt you will. Let's start with the first one. Going to move on to the next picture in 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, going to move on in 3 seconds. 2, 1. Last picture. All right, let's take these up. Before we get into what exactly it was you saw in each picture, Emma, what is it that makes people think differently about the same picture? Why did we not get the same response for ice cream all the time?
It's really because we all have different perceptions. We all have different ways that we can understand or perceive something, and it's based off of a lot of different things. It can be based on our age. It can be based on, the area that we live in. On this slide, it's going to say a lot more, but it could be cultural factors. It could be your sex or your gender. It could be, for example, your values. Everybody has different things that really make up who we are as a person, and they really cause us to perceive things in a different way. For example, Steve and I, we're different ages, and we're also different genders. So for example, maybe watching I don't know, the newest video by Cardi B, the newest music video, I might think, wow, this is kind of cool. I like the fashion. Or Steve might think, wow, this is ridiculous, right? And it's because we're perceiving it differently because of our own individual life experience. But one thing that can really modify how we perceive things is really the media. They do a really good job at kind of altering our perception and how we perceive a product. And they do this through a variety of different tricks. For example, when we were looking at those pictures, if a media used, for example, the image of someone that looked maybe a little bit hungover to try and present cannabis, that picture in the middle, it might not sell a cannabis product as well as the image on the right, where there's a guy that's smoking a joint. He's looking like he's vibing and having a really good time, right?
And with that in mind, it kind of brings me to the audience responses. What did you guys have for the first picture? What were some of the answers, the words you thought of when you saw that first picture? You feel free to pop these into the chat too. Weed, smoke, high, joint, pot, joint, joint, joint. Okay, a lot of people saying joint. What about the second picture? I like inhalation there, method of consumption. I see pain, I see hangover, I see stress, frustration, regrets, anxiety. A great deal of almost sort of negative depiction, right? What about the third picture? What do you think of here? Happiness, joy, entertainment.
All of these like positive words, right? Someone's feeling relaxed, they have good vibe, they're feeling chill.
Absolutely. And Emma, you spoke to this very well. How is it that advertisers influence our perspective of cannabis use? Well, if I was a retailer and I wanted to sell the product itself to a customer, Emma, which one of these pictures would I probably use?
I think you would definitely be using the one on the right. Nobody wants to be promoting their product, with an image of someone that looks like they're having a really bad time, right?
Absolutely. Now, if I worked in mental health awareness or addiction awareness or substance use awareness, which one of these images might I be tempted to use?
You might want to be tempted to use the one on the left, but I honestly would suggest it's better to keep things balanced when you're working in that specific field. So probably that first image that we saw, that was just a picture of someone rolling a joint. You couldn't see the expression on their face, right?
Absolutely. And I think in reality, you could probably use all three as long as you use all three.
Yeah.
You want to promote balance. There is a reality that cannabis could cause stress, it could cause grief, but there's also a reality we could see euphoria and positive experiences. That honesty matters when you're interacting with youth. If you only point out the negatives and they don't see them happening in the real world, they're not going to believe you. If you're a retailer and you point out all the positives, any customer that understands the potential risks of cannabis use is obviously going to call into question the credibility of said retailer. So it's important to really understand that both of these are possibilities, just as real as one another. Now, Emma, you mentioned that retailers use certain themes or tactics in ads. What are some of those themes that they do use?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can see on the slide, we have 5 main themes. The first one is that idea of glamour or status. So kind of that idea that people that choose to use cannabis have almost like a glamorous lifestyle. So almost like maybe that party, that influencer type of vibe. The second one that you can see is that idea of it being natural or safe. So you can see in some products that are sold at dispensaries, they'll say words kind of like farm grown, organic. Of course, with those words, just kind of how the human brain works, a lot of times people might think that they are safer or less harmful than other products just because they're grown in that specific way. Another one is fun or relaxation. So kind of that idea that using these specific products are going to make you have a really fun time, or they're going to make you feel so relaxed, maybe take away all of your worries. Another one is normalization. So just kind of that idea that it's using cannabis as a very normal experience. So they might be showing, a group of people holding cannabis products at a party, or it could even be group identity. So it could be that maybe, you're seeing a cannabis ad and everybody in the ad is a skateboarder. They have a skateboarder. So of course, if you're someone that enjoys riding a skateboard, you might be more, it might be more of an appealing ad to you because just the people in the image, they almost in a way represent you. It speaks out to you, right?
You're absolutely right. But one of the things that we like to point out is that there's a need for reality there, right? Retailers are going to try to depict glamour and status to show that a person using a substance is going to be somehow elevated by using. It's similar to what we see in advertising for alcohol. You're often going to see young, affluent, attractive people having a great time, and somehow the status is associated with the alcohol use. Similarly with cannabis, we know that the reality isn't that they're somehow better for using, but they're not worse either. Using cannabis has no way of really defining someone as an individual. Using cannabis doesn't make you cool, but it also doesn't make you a loser or somehow negatively depicted. Emma, you also pointed out that idea of normalization and group identity. These are common practices that we see from cannabis industries when we're trying to promote the idea of cannabis, especially because retailers have to fight against this preconceived stigma around cannabis use that somehow it makes people worse, which, like we said before, isn't true. So they point to this idea that in their advertisement or their promotion, they're going to try to sell you on the idea that everyone's going to use. But the reality is, we know the majority of teens don't actually report using cannabis. And with young adults, only very recently have we seen past 12-month cannabis use for adults aged 19 to 24 come in around 48 to 51%. So it's around that majority point. But once you combine it with teens, that 15 to 24 demographic, the majority actually don't use overall. And with teens, that number is around 1 in 5. And finally, a retailer that's trying to sell a product is likely not going to spend much time pointing at the risks. That's our role as healthcare providers. That's our role as educators. But we have to point out that these risks are potential. There's a potential for harm. We don't try to tell our clients or our customers or our youth or the people that we're working with that all cannabis use is bad, all cannabis use is risky. We know that's not true. It's that potential is there and that the reality exists somewhere in the middle. At the beginning of the presentation, we talked about the importance of neutrality in our workshops. There's an importance in neutrality when discussing media and substance use with youth, so that they feel they can trust you a little bit more and that you're not leaning too far one way or the other. Now, different social media platforms do sort of have different standards and regulations when it comes to cannabis use. They're not all the same, right, Emma?
No, absolutely not. So we do have 4 different types of social media platforms listed here. Of course, you'll know that there are some more that are out there, but these are just kind of the most common ones that young people tend to use. Now, when we're talking about YouTube, one of the things that we want to highlight is that with YouTube, it is not permitted to sell cannabis products through the specific platform. And the content that is about cannabis on YouTube, it can't be glorifying it. It must be fact-based or it must be humorous. So it can't be that someone is going on YouTube and they're saying like, wow, this is changing my life. This is making everything so much better for me. It could be though that someone is making a video about maybe, how cannabis works in the endocannabinoid system, how it affects brain development. It could be talking about the differences between THC and CBD. It must be educational or fact-based. But then on the humorous side, it could be someone making a video that's maybe talking about funny things that they do when they're high. Now, when we're talking about Instagram, it's kind of a similar story, a little bit different. When we're looking at Instagram, they're not allowed to advertise or sell cannabis. So if someone is maybe a dealer, they can't be showing like, hey, I have this in stock, call this number for pickup. Or it can't be like a specific cannabis brand that is saying, this product is amazing, you can buy it XYZ location. Another thing too is that if people do want to advertise their product, they are allowed to put a website link in their bio information. So for example, if it's Tweed, they might be able to talk a little bit about what their company is on Instagram. They can't sell it, but really their best way to advertise to young people through Instagram is just through that link in their bio. Now on Facebook, the ads can't promote use of illicit or recreational drugs and products or supplements. So it can be, once again, more kind of like that information, the educational information, harm reduction strategies. But we do find that Facebook typically does have quite a few walls put up in terms of how cannabis is discussed on their platform. A lot of times they have certain keywords that are flagged if they show up in the same sentence. So if you put youth and cannabis together in the same sentence on Facebook, a lot of times they'll flag it and the post will get taken down. For us being the Youth Cannabis Awareness Program, that can make social media a little bit difficult. And then on Twitch, cannabis use content is allowed as long as it has a mature content label, as long as it's not breaking local laws. So for example, here in Canada, here in Alberta, someone that's 18 plus, they can make a Twitch stream where they're using cannabis products. They can do it as long as it doesn't cause them to inflict self-harm, and it's not the main focus of their broadcast. So someone, for example, here in Alberta, if they're 18 plus, they could be streaming themselves playing Fortnite and smoking a joint or smoking a bong. That is totally allowed on that specific platform. So kind of good to know, especially if you have young people in your life who are using these platforms. A lot of times they do try to age gate certain types of things on these platforms. So for example, on Instagram, there might be like a tweet account that says only access this account or view this account if you're 18 plus. But of course, it's very easy to lie about your age online, especially if they're not asking for your ID. So they kind of are trying to put some limits in place so that young people aren't viewing these contents. But they do, a lot of times young people still do these anyway. Anything you'd like to add, Steve?
I would add again, when we discussed media earlier, there's that importance of understanding that media itself is a communication tool. These platforms aren't making cannabis good or bad. Again, they're allowing a platform through which cannabis can be shown, but it's an attempt to make it as neutral as possible without glorification. And even in the case of things like not causing you to inflict self-harm with Twitch, you're not showing cannabis as this horrifically, very graphic, potentially traumatizing thing to see in imagery as well. So it's really that importance of using communication as the neutral tool that it is. Now, earlier we talked about advertising, right? Advertising with the paid messages with the intent of convincing a customer to buy a product or pay for a service. What's a public service announcement? There's a difference there. They often run in similar facets and manners to how advertising does. But what is a PSA, or a public service announcement? What's our audience think? They were to explain this one. They had some great definitions for media earlier. Usually a message relating to safety. Absolutely. I see warning here. Yeah. What else? I often like to explain nonprofit, no cost. Okay. Possibly, yeah. There's a lot of truth in these statements I'm seeing here, which is great. A public service announcement. Let's see what else we got. Precautions, absolutely. Really, it's a message whose intent is to educate people. I often say the difference between advertising and public service is an advertisement is trying to sell you a product or a service. A PSA is usually trying to convince you of an idea. They're trying to spread a message in the interest of the public. Their goal is to raise awareness and change public attitudes, opinions, or even behavior towards an issue. Sometimes their messaging can be instructional, inspirational, and in some cases even shocking. So their goal is to really change the attitudes. And we have seen a wide array of examples, right? I see someone in the chat mentioned the little hippo commercial, the North American house hippo. It's always a favorite PSA of mine. Or the don't put it in your mouth thing from the 1990s about not eating things as small children that shouldn't go in your mouth. But we also see examples of PSAs about bullying, problem gambling, donating blood, poverty, road safety, mental health, cancer, fire safety, suicide, vaccine, alcohol, nutrition. There's a wide array of subjects for which we will see PSAs. Now, the strategies and best practices around public service has changed, especially around substance use in the last number of years. And to prove this, I'm actually going to show you two different commercials. The first one is from 1987. It is from the old anti-cannabis PSA known as Partnership for a Drug-Free America. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this one up here and show it to you. Just got to get my link going properly. And hopefully not have my computer try to crash on me like it just did. Lovely. So I'm going to pull this up real quick. Emma, can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. When I was pulling up the video, my PowerPoint decided to close on me. But here we are. This is what I want. Let's put it there. We're going to pause this. Here we are, right there. All right. Can you see the video now, Emma?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Now, before I show you the next PSA that we have, because I'm going to show you another one from 2020, when we see that this is your brain on drugs PSA, what kind of practices are we seeing here, Emma? What are we seeing this PSA trying to do?
It's scare tactics, 110%.
Absolutely. You're depicting a worst case scenario that if someone uses substances, somehow their brain is absolutely going to collapse on itself, right? The this is your brain on drugs message. And for a long time in abstinence-only programs that promoted normative behavior, this was the message that was shown. If you use substances, the worst things will always happen. No questions, so just don't do them. That was the just say no message. However, the problem is we know it didn't work, because if it did, we wouldn't see cannabis being used. We wouldn't have an alcohol industry. We wouldn't have a tobacco industry. We wouldn't have a gambling industry, because people would not partake in any behaviors that involved risk. So PSAs had to evolve, because this use of scare tactics has been shown to be ineffective, and youth either become indifferent or wind up acting in sort of an anti-response to the PSA itself. In fact, some research from the 90s actually suggested that individuals that went through the DARE program, the Just Say No campaign, were actually statistically more likely to try drugs than people who did not go through the campaigns. So PSAs needed to evolve. Here we have a PSA from CAA, Canadian Automobile Association, released in 2020. Load this one up. We'll see it's a little bit different. Plays like this. As soon as it plays.
Jake took an edible. And now he thinks he's being followed. By his ride. He'll figure it out eventually. Or not.
Different kind of a campaign, isn't it, Emma?
Absolutely. It's like apples and oranges.
What was going on in this PSA versus the previous one that we saw?
It was more encouraging kind of those harm reduction strategies. And it was definitely suggesting, if you do choose to use cannabis, trying to get alternate transportation, not going behind the wheel of the car yourself. It's not this type of attitude that, if you use cannabis, all of these horrible things are going to happen to you. It doesn't use scare tactics. It's more encouraging people to make safer choices if they decide to use the substance.
Absolutely. And for the audience, was there any point in that PSA that we saw someone say, don't use substances? Did that come up at all during that second PSA? No, not even a little, right? What we saw was an understanding that people may choose to use. And even the tagline that the company came up with, which is that idea, if you use, do anything else. They showed this long list of possible things that could be done. Play video games, hang out with your friends, pet a dog, go for a walk, have some food. It was do anything but drive. Make the message a positive message as opposed to a negative message, because youth are more likely to give positive responses to positive messaging. In other words, instead of telling people what not to do, what you'll find is more effective is showing them things that they could be doing or things they should be doing. So in a PSA about cannabis, we want to discuss things like using one substance at a time, avoiding mixing substances like alcohol or tobacco with cannabis, Seeking support if you're using cannabis as a coping strategy. So understanding what those resources are that are available to help you with support if you were someone you know is experiencing issues related to mental health or overall wellness. Understanding that everyone's reaction to cannabis is different, and designating a sober driver. In this commercial, this person that had used cannabis had still even designated a sober driver. They actually even showed a harm reduction strategy right there. And finally, the idea when in doubt, wait it out. If you've taken a substance recently and you don't know how you feel and you don't know if you want to use more, there's nothing wrong with waiting. Emma?
For sure. Thanks, Steve. So I just want to ask a question to the group. On average, how many ads do you think we're exposed to each day? So I saw Dalia mention 100, Janessa saying 25, 100. All right, Steve, let's see what it is. It's going to be a bit of a surprising amount. So it's approximately around 4,000 advertisements per day. And really, we got to put this into perspective. We're seeing advertisements from the moment we wake up. It could be, looking at brands, if you're buying Special K cereal and you're using that every day, you're seeing that brand everywhere. If you watch the morning news, you're going to be seeing lots of advertisements. If you listen to the radio on the way to work, if you take the bus or public transit, there's going to be advertisements everywhere. If you drive to work, there's going to be billboards. If you're on social media, if you're grocery shopping, ads are legitimately everywhere. See, even Steve's YMCA mug that he's using, it has a Y on it, which is our symbol, but in a way could indirectly be an advertisement for the YMCA. So another question is, have you seen any ads on these social media platforms? Because we really want to hone in on the idea of social media. We mentioned that we're seeing about 4,000 ads per day. Now, a lot of us were spending a lot more time on social media than humans ever have before. So have you seen these? And I'm seeing Matthew is saying, yes, lots on social media. And I tend to agree. I'm someone that likes to use, either Snapchat, YouTube, TikTok out of the ones that are on here. And I mean, if I go on YouTube, I'm seeing typically, 2 or 3 ads per video. If I'm on TikTok and I'm scrolling, for about 10 minutes, I'm seeing a few ads there. Snapchat is starting to come out with a lot more ads as well. Really, it's hard to be able to escape ads these days. And on certain platforms, you're actually having to pay some sort of subscription costs so that you're not seeing as many ads. So you can see that, for example, on YouTube, if you're on just, the free version, you can see ads on all of these different areas. You can see it on the side of the video, before, after the video, during the feature video. There's skippable ads and non-skippable ads. And then even the feature video could be a promotion one. So for example, if maybe you're watching some sort of makeup artist talk about a new eyeshadow palette, that's indirectly an advertisement. And typically people want to get, rid of these ads more or less. They have to pay for like a premium version of YouTube, I believe. But regardless, if you want to keep it more budget friendly, you're seeing these advertisements everywhere, a lot more places than you probably imagine. And I see that someone in the chat is mentioning Netflix. Yeah, Netflix always has lots of ads everywhere. Well, maybe not direct ones. I know that they're planning to add more advertisements in Netflix, but if you're watching any of those like Netflix shows, there's like really discrete advertisements for different products everywhere. Now, kind of moving on to like similar but different topic, how often have you seen cannabis content on social media? So we're seeing that there's lots of people that are seeing advertisements in general on social media, but when it comes down to cannabis, have you seen any cannabis content before? And if you have, like, what type has it been? Has it been more like PSAs? Has it been advertisements from different brands? So I'm seeing Kathleen mentioned in the chat, lots on Snapchat. What have you seen on Snapchat, Kathleen? Was it like PSAs? Was it more like advertisements? So Kathleen mentioned that it's advertisements. I've seen those as well. And even just by scrolling on Twitter, you can see tweets sometimes. What about you, Steve? Have you seen lots of cannabis content on social media? Like, I know you mentioned now that you've seen more PSAs, but what types of things were you seeing on social media when you first started this job?
Well, I saw quite a bit of cannabis content, but it's not as direct as simply seeing an advertisement from a company. What you were seeing quite a bit was often social media celebrities or influencers, or people that live their lives on social media for audiences using cannabis or wearing cannabis related apparel and products. And we've actually really seen an evolution in the depiction of cannabis in media. In fact, in the mid 2010s, it was shown that there's a lot of social media content that relates to cannabis. Certainly, then we've seen this increasingly in music. We've seen this in movies. We've seen this on television. We've seen this again on social media platforms. But unlike the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe even early 2000s, where any depictions of cannabis were more often to be negative depictions, the pendulum has almost swung the other way altogether. The mass majority of messaging we see on cannabis on social media nowadays is positive. In fact, positive tweets about cannabis are approximately 15 times more common than negative tweets about cannabis. So we've actually seen a swing away from this heavy use of stigmatization and negative depiction, almost completely the other way, to this idea of a pro-cannabis community or a pro-cannabis culture. Now, have you ever seen social media celebrities try or promote a product? I'll ask the audience this one. And while they're thinking about it, Emma, have you ever seen someone on social media try a product of any kind?
Absolutely, all the time. Me, I love like makeup and clothes, so I'm always watching videos of people like either trying different makeup tutorials or showing off their outfits. So really, I'm seeing these types of things all the time.
Have you ever tried something they promoted?
I did once.
Was it like they said it would be?
Honestly, like I had a good experience with the product, and it was mainly because it was like a reputable product. But then again, like I remember one time someone was advertising like some sort of like lip balm on TikTok, and I thought, huh, this looks interesting. I'm gonna order it. And it ended up like giving me an allergic reaction. It was horrible. So it can really go either way, right?
Absolutely. And I do see a lot of comments here in the chats as well. People talking about how they see these things all the time. I see some person saying that YouTubers promote THC gummies. I've seen that as well. Weight loss products. And I also see the idea that many people are promoting CBD products for various ailments. This is something that unfortunately we find ourselves having to speak about quite a bit in our presentations, is youth in particular and first-time users or even people that just aren't that familiar with the topic. They've heard cannabis as a way to treat anxiety or a way to treat depression or a way to treat insomnia or an anti-cancer medication. Well, in Canada, CBD-based products are really only prescribable for three things. The first is as an antiemetic to prevent nausea and vomiting if a person is going through chemotherapy or radiation treatments. So it's not curing cancer, it's just helping with the symptoms of the treatments. Second is appetite stimulation. So someone who, again, may be going through advanced cancer or HIV treatments may find that their appetite is quite low. So they may be prescribed CBD or low potency THC products to increase appetite. And the third is for chronic pain management. And this is for people that live with things like multiple sclerosis or chronic arthritis, or maybe have had a recurring injury or recurring pain from an injury. So many of the other things that we hear talked about, things like anxiety, depression, sleep, for lack of a better term, the jury's still really out on those. There's not really evidence that shows that CBD will only act as an anti-anxiety medication, just like THC. Some people mention that they use cannabis to help themselves when they're stressed, but long-term research has actually shown that continuous use of THC can actually increase feelings of anxiety. Individuals that use cannabis to help with sleep, some people may say that it helps them sleep, while others may say it keeps them up all night. There's a lack of consistency really in what we see in the experiences of one person to the next. However, the pull of social media can often sway someone to make a decision that may not be as informed as if they were to consult with a healthcare provider or do a little bit more research from not just a retailer, but from health, from research, from accredited journals. And these are complicated things to read through. And with that in mind, do we think YouTube subscribers are more likely to try a product if it's recommended by a celebrity or by a YouTuber? What do we think? More likely to try it from a celebrity, more likely to try it from a YouTuber? YouTuber, they're more relatable. Precisely. Google and Nielsen in the late 2010s conducted a survey, and they found that about half of people surveyed said they would trust a product if it came from a TV or movie star. But almost 2/3 said they would trust it if it came from a YouTuber or a social media celebrity. Now, these numbers don't total 100 because some people said both, some people said neither, but the majority said YouTuber, and the second most common response was TV or movie star. So when we look at influencers on social media, this is often how you see cannabis depicted. A company themselves will not say, here's our product. Instead, what they'll do is they'll pay someone on social media to say, here's the products I use. Now, they can't say that they're great or they can't say that they make things better because that would be glamorizing the product or glorifying the product. But having that connection of the person's name to that product may increase its visibility or may increase its marketability. We see social media celebrities on here, we've got Instagram followers, 91,000, 8.4 million likes, 316,000 followers, 850,000 subscribers, 700,000 followers, 762,000 subscribers. So we know that people do subscribe and follow celebrities online or influencers online when it comes to cannabis. Now, what do we know about celebrity partnerships with cannabis companies? Emma, do we see examples of these?
Absolutely, all the time. You can see on the slide that there's like an example of Snoop Dogg partnering with Tweed. You can see Drake. Realistically, there's so many different celebrities that are out there that are partnering with cannabis companies these days. And a lot of times I feel like people are more prone to try these products, especially if they have a connection with that celebrity. Although there is an idea of like a psychological principle of familiarity, that we're going to talk about on the next slide, where it's kind of that idea that people are more likely to remember products if they are endorsed by a celebrity. It doesn't really make a difference whether or not you were a fan, only if you knew who the celebrity was. So for example, if Drake put out some sort of cannabis product, a lot of us here in Canada, we know who Drake is. He's from Toronto. So, if you're maybe a Canadian, maybe Steve, I don't know if you like Drake, but if let's say you decided to use cannabis, you might prefer to use Drake's cannabis brand versus maybe like the spinach or the tweed, because it comes from him or he was a part of developing that product. And of course, if someone is a fan of Drake, they're going to be a lot more likely to be using that specific product because they are a fan, right?
We see this with many products too. I often point to Justin Bieber as another example of this. A lot of people love Justin Bieber. A lot of people don't love Justin Bieber. But either way, Justin Bieber partnered with Tim Hortons last year to put out a product. Do you recall what those were, Emma?
Yes, the Tim Biebs. And I gotta say, I am not a Justin Bieber fan, but I was really I ended up buying them because it looked really interesting. The flavors looked cool. The packaging was really nice. And honestly, this psychological principle of familiarity, it pulled me in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We saw this with Nike a number of years ago, around the time that quarterback Colin Kaepernick in the NFL began kneeling during the national anthem. There was a great deal of uproar and support at the same time for this athlete for choosing to take a knee during the national anthem. And Nike was actually a company that decided to back him. And they created this very simple ad campaign where it showed his face with the Nike logo that said, believe in something, even if it means losing everything. And people spoke out about this. People were upset about this. Nike saw a massive drop off in their stock overnight, but over the next 7 days, they generated more profit that next week than they had at any point in years before. People were buying Nike products. I read articles from the certain states in the US that people were spending tens of thousands of dollars to buy out Nike products from stores just so they could go burn the products at home, those that didn't support. And those that did support were buying the products because they supported. But the funny thing was, even the people that said, I'm going to buy out all the Nike products because I don't like Nike and I want to get rid of all of it, they spent tens of thousands of dollars to buy the products. So the advertisement still worked. It's incredible, isn't it? Speaking of credibility, how do you verify if information online is credible or true? Well, first you have to consider the source. Click away from the story to investigate the website. See if it's legit. Make sure you have a virus scanner on or a pop-up blocker in case you go somewhere that's a little suspect. Check the author. Is the author a credited name? Is it a name that you've seen before? Are they real? Read beyond, look at supporting sources. These are great things to teach youth, but they're also great things to teach adults. Check the date on an article. I hear people that talk about articles in sports, in media, in politics, as though they just happened yesterday when they didn't happen for 3 years or 4 years, right? Take a look at seeing whether or not it's a joke. There's a great deal of satire we see in social media today. A lot of parody, people coming up with stories simply because they're funny to write down. Consider bias. We see bias from news reporting. We see bias in sports. If you listen to a home team radio station, you're going to hear the home team announcer support the home team, and they're going to call the game differently for the home team than they will for the visiting team. We see this in news. There are two major news companies in the United States that one will often talk about one side of the political spectrum while the other focuses more on the other. It's important to consider biases when listening to these sorts of depictions. And finally, ask the experts. If you don't know, it's okay to ask someone. And especially when we talk about cannabis, if someone sees something in advertising that's too good to be true, or something in a PSA that they want to question it and say, well, is this always going to happen? They need to know that they can speak with professionals. And we'll talk about those in a moment. But the very last ones we want to talk about with harm reduction, when we're looking at media literacy, is reminding people to think critically, to ask questions, to ask the right questions. Why am I seeing this? Why is this important? How do I feel about it? Install ad blockers. Set limits on screen time. We know the average Canadian right now spends about 10.5 hours a day on screen time. Not a lot of us do that for work, but particularly when we look at youth, that number can be as high as 12 or 13 hours a day. Reminding them to set limits and balance their lifestyle, to continue doing other things they enjoy. If you're sharing content, share with care. Be mindful of what it is that you're sharing, and beware of false, misleading news that could lead to scams, spams, or other viruses. Now, finally, if you or someone else you know is using substances, we've been talking about media and cannabis and kind of going back and forth, but one of the things we always like to bring up is if you or someone else you know is using substances and you're looking for supports and you don't know who to contact, for youth, if you have youth clients, we often recommend Kids Help Phone, a national charity operating 3 counseling centers and offering community engagement initiatives through staff and volunteers across Canada. For the young adults that you work with, we have Good to Talk. Here in Ontario as well as in Nova Scotia. There are similar platforms in other provinces like Good to Chat as well as 211. Here in Ontario, we also know that we have Connex, which is a great sort of networking hub for finding supports and resources. There are also a multitude of resources available all across Canada. These include sort of AMH out in Alberta. We've got Manitoba Health Foundation. We have sort of the Island Helpline in PEI. We have the Kamatsiaktut Inuit Helpline in Nunavut. Each province will usually have a provincial sort of entity that will act as a resource hub for the rest of that given province. Like I said, here in Ontario, the one I often refer is Connex. Is there one in particular in Alberta that you point to, Emma?
Yeah, so we do have an addictions helpline through Alberta Health Services. That's kind of the main one that I always think of. But if we're thinking of like young people specifically, I know that there is a new organization called Kickstand, which is really excellent. They have walk-in online counseling available for young people between the ages of 12 to 25, where they can talk about, different mental health concerns, substance use, but also attend different workshops and group sessions. So definitely always really like to call out that organization.
Absolutely. And I suppose the very last thing I want to do is thank all of you for joining us today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to let us know. We will stick around here on the call. A fairly good amount of time today, Emma. I think we went about 65 minutes. So I want to thank you all for joining. I know we booked till 2:30. We like to leave that extra bit of time in case there are questions, in case there are feedback. If there's anything you'd like to know, we'll leave the call open. Otherwise, I will end the recording for posting, and this will be able to be shared probably before the end of the day. It will be going up on our hub a little bit later on this month. But otherwise, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And like I said, once the recording is over, you can also stay on the line if you have any questions. Is there anything you want to add, Emma?
No, you summed everything up really greatly, Steve. Realistically, like if you do need to contact any of us, you can see that there is like that lovely YCAP email at the bottom of the screen. We can also put our personal emails in the chat. But thank you all for joining us today. You all were a great audience, and I really appreciated all of the participation in our questions. It made everything go by really smoothly, for sure.
I absolutely agree. Thank you all very, very much.